The American people have spoken. They made clear what we have known for months. President Donald J. Trump is our Republican nominee and will be the 47th President of the United States. His America First agenda secured our borders, made America energy independent, and always puts the needs of the American people first. That is not the State of the Union we will hear from Joe Biden this week, because the American people deeply understand that under Joe Biden's failed presidency, the State of the Union is in crisis. And this is a crisis of Joe Biden's making. As Ronald Reagan famously asked us, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" The answer for hardworking Americans across the country is a resounding no. Whether it's the catastrophic border crisis ravaging our nation and leading to tragic loss of life of American citizens, the painful Bidenflation causing middle-class families to struggle to make ends meet, or our most precious ally Israel facing the bloodiest day since the Holocaust, as Joe Biden projects weakness around the globe. Joe Biden has failed America and the American people. And at what will be his final State of the Union, Joe Biden and the White House will desperately try to pass the buck, blame Congress, and shirk responsibility in a desperate attempt to reset his abysmal presidency. But it won't work because the American people are smart. There is no reset button for Joe Biden. Even the Democrats' loyal stenographers in the mainstream media have been forced to acknowledge that Joe Biden is a deteriorating president with a failed record and polling in free fall. Each of our House Republican members will host a guest that highlights the Joe Biden State of the Union in crisis, whether it's Border Patrol officers like my guest from the North Country, Brandon Budlong, or families who have lost loved ones due to Joe Biden's dangerous open border policies. Each of our members who will speak today will talk about these issues as we prepare to hear from Joe Biden this week. And one of the members who understands the impact of Joe Biden's crises firsthand is Congresswoman Jen Kagans from Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Jen.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for being here to listen to our concerns today. I'm Congresswoman Jen Kagans, and I proudly represent Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. I flipped one of the toughest seats in the country last year because I ran off being a mom on a mission. We ran off of those kitchen table issues. I'm a mom to 4 young adults, and I have a lot of questions that I need Joe Biden to answer tomorrow in his State of the Union address. I worry every day about the financial future for my children. I worry about the debt they're inheriting. I worry about if they're going to be able to buy a new car or buy a new house, if they're going to be able to pay off their credit card bills and still put food on their table. We know that Joe Biden has taken away our energy independence, and he's put crippling regulation and mandates on our businesses. We're in an economic crisis right now that has taken the American dream away from so many families, including my own children. I want him to address these issues, and I know that other moms like me and dads and families also care about their financial future for their children. I worry about my kids' safety every day. I worry about my kids when they're not with me. I worry about them when they're driving. I worry about them when they're out with their friends or when they're at college and when they're alone. Joe Biden has made our communities less safe. He's done this through a wide open border that I visited twice. We've got to put some restrictions on our border. We've seen human trafficking, fentanyl trafficking, and also a sharp rise in violent crimes just in our own communities. He has jeopardized my children's safety. We've seen him jeopardizing our national security with a wide open border. We've got an increase in Chinese nationals and people on the terrorist watch list coming across our border every day. I want him to respond to my concerns about safety for my own children and for the children of all Americans. As a former Navy pilot, Navy spouse, and now Navy mom, I'm especially concerned about the future of our country on the world stage. It keeps me up at night. He's put not only my kids at risk, but all of our military men and women and their families at risk by being weak on the world stage. We've seen what happened with the chaotic withdrawal in Afghanistan, what's happened with Russia and Ukraine, what's happened with Iran-backed Hamas and Israel, and we're seeing increased aggression every single day in Southeast Asia from China. We know that the world's involved in a chaos and war, and that's due to Joe Biden's weak leadership. Jeopardizing my children's safety motivates me every single day. Joe Biden needs to respond to why our country looks weak on the world stage. And I need him to respond not just with political rhetoric and empty lies in an election year. I need him to respond with actual facts and telling me what he's done and what he's going to do to keep my children safe, and again, the children of so many Americans. I will be watching tomorrow night like so many other moms and dads will be, and I hope our concerns are answered. Thank you. And now it's a great honor for me to introduce my colleague, Mark Molinaro from New York 19.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you all for being here this morning. Laken Riley's killer was arrested and released in the state of New York, in my home state. Why? Because states like New York embrace sanctuary city policies. Governors like Kathy Hochul embolden a national crisis, undermine public safety, and threaten the very lives of their neighbors because of their failure to confront a crisis of their making. And tomorrow, I will welcome 2 upstate county sheriffs from the state of New York. And while last evening there were pundits on national television laughing about the fact that voters across America, American families, know and understand that the crisis at our border is undermining not only national safety, but community and public safety, communities like those that I represent and families like those I live with and among know firsthand not only the pain and the struggle that has been caused because of an open border and the policies and determination and decisions of this president, but because every day, in every way, policies out of this administration and out of states like New York continue to undermine public safety and the ability of law enforcement to provide for it. And tomorrow, those county sheriffs will stand in the halls of Congress, hoping that a president will acknowledge the crisis he created. And that's at the heart of this. President Biden not only has surrendered our southern border to cartels, but he's engaged in an effort to mass relocate illegal immigrants across the country, making every state in America a border state, but more importantly, threatening not only those very individual lives, but the lives of American families and communities across this country. Tomorrow, the president could simply repeal his executive orders that have fueled, emboldened, and made worse this crisis. Governor Hochul in New York could end sanctuary city policy with a stroke of a pen. If they cared, they would. And we are hopeful that the voice of the American people, that which some chose to laugh at last evening, will be heard not only by this president, but will continue to embolden members of the House Republican Conference to continue to stand for them and for national security, public safety, and closing and securing our border. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague from Iowa, Zach Nunn.
Morning, friends. This morning, as a guy who has served in the military on combat operations that deterred China from bringing deadly fentanyl to our shores, that has commanded military forces that struck out at cartels inside Mexico, we now face a very different world 3 years on. Nearly 8 million illegals entering into our country. And in my district that had been a blue district, as a freshman that we turned red, we took the effort to say this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is a national security issue. And so at the State of the Union, let me be very clear. My guest will be the Kidd family, and their story enshrines so much of the challenges that folks of all political backgrounds are facing. The threat facing their children. Their son, Sebastian, was a typical Iowa kid. He was on the wrestling team. He played golf, he loved his friends, and he adored his parents. And after dealing with anxiety and depression, he found a friend who offered him a Percocet. That Percocet was laced with deadly fentanyl, and the next morning, he did not wake up. The Kidd family has addressed this tragedy by trying to save the lives of other families across America with their heroic work. But as I invited the Kidd family to join me at the State of the Union, that family asked the question that so many Americans are asking. If we had just secured our border, would my son be alive today? And the reality is, we now have 3 years where choices were made in this White House that threaten the lives of families across America. Whether that be a nursing student in Georgia or Molly Tibbetts right in my hometown of Iowa. we have a situation where our country is under siege. A particular salute to our law enforcement in Iowa on I-35, the main interstate coming up from Mexico to Des Moines, where law enforcement seized 30,000 fentanyl pills. Let's be very clear. Pills produced and made by China, shipped to cartels in Mexico that showed up on American shores. This is simply a weapon of mass destruction, the #1 cause of death for folks my age down to my high school daughter's age. And so this Thursday, as the president comes forward, we need more than rhetoric. We need a plan. We need the type of leadership that actions life-saving measures to protect our country from an international threat at our own southern border. And so, Mr. President, as you address the nation, think of the Kidd family. Think of how we can save future kids, not just in Iowa, but across the country, by doing the right thing today. With that, I can think of no one stronger to lead this effort than our own gentleman from the heart of the heartland, our whip, Tom Emmer. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. According to reports, Joe Biden and his allies are billing tomorrow's State of the Union address as their, quote, big public reset moment. The problem with their strategy is that the American people are going to see right through whatever scripted rhetoric Biden ends up reading off the teleprompter tomorrow night. From the southern border to the economy to foreign policy, the facts are quite clear. Joe Biden has failed on every single issue. Our State of the Union has been defined by unprecedented chaos thanks to this administration's failed policies. And it's the American people who have been left to suffer as a result. Americans elected our House Republican majority at the first chance they were given to counteract Joe Biden's disastrous agenda, and we've worked hard to deliver. On the economy, it was Joe Biden's runaway spending that led to double-digit inflation, historic interest rates, and bank collapses. Meanwhile, House Republicans passed legislation to lower costs for families and put us on a path toward fiscal responsibility. On the southern border, it's Joe Biden who has refused to undo his 64 executive actions that created this crisis in the first place. House Republicans, on the other hand, passed historic border legislation that finishes the wall, reforms parole authority, reforms asylum authority, ends catch and release, and would restore Remain in Mexico, which our Customs and Border Patrol says the last one would staunch the flow of illegal aliens into this country overnight by 70%. And on foreign policy, it's Joe Biden's weakness on the world stage that has empowered our adversaries while doing little to reassure our allies. In stark contrast, House Republicans passed legislation to reverse the White House's policies emboldening Iran, refocus our military on winning combat wars, not the Democrats' culture wars, and unapologetically support Israel. Needless to say, Americans need much more than a, quote, reset moment out of this administration. It's time for new leadership, and the people are going to make their voices heard at the ballot box this November. Until then, we're going to have to continue doing our part to combat Joe Biden's failed policies and hold this White House accountable. And with that, I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to our speaker, our leader, Steve Scalise. Sorry.
Thank you, Whip. Tomorrow, on the same day and in the same chamber where Joe Biden will be giving his State of the Union address, the House will be taking up the Laken Riley Act. We'll be debating and passing a bill to confront yet another crisis that Joe Biden himself created, a crisis that has had devastating impacts on families like Laken Riley's. I want to commend Mike Collins and Barry Loudermilk for working with Laken Riley's family, who were devastated, as you can expect, at the loss of their daughter. A completely unnecessary tragedy that was created because Joe Biden opened the southern border. And every community in America is seeing crime, murders, devastation
at the hands of people coming here illegally and doing harm to our citizens. I've seen it in my own backyard in Kenner, Louisiana, just a few days ago, where a 14-year-old girl was raped by someone here illegally because Joe Biden opened the southern border. How many more families will have to suffer before Joe Biden finally admits his mistake and corrects what he did? We passed a bill. This House came together and passed H.R. 2, a bill that actually would secure our border. We worked with our Border Patrol agents and others. And everybody knows what needs to happen. When Joe Biden went to the border just a few days ago for a photo op, he had an opportunity to reverse his own damage that he created through executive action. He could have ended catch and release. He could have worked to restore the Remain in Mexico policy that was so effective under President Trump. It was a negotiated agreement. It takes a little work to call a foreign leader and make sure you're doing everything you can to protect your country, but that's Joe Biden's job, and he is failing on every front. He could do it with a pen. He says Congress needs to act. Well, then he should ask the Senate to pass H.R. 2, a bill that would actually solve the problem, not make it worse, as we've seen in some of the other bills floating around the Senate. But again, Joe Biden could do this on his own because he created this problem with his pen. Is he going to look tomorrow night into the eyes of Laken Riley's family and every other family in America and say he's going to do everything in his power to stop this invasion? Millions of people on the terrorist watch list that have come into our country because he opened the border, and he can close the border, but he refuses to do so. So when you look at all the crises Joe Biden's created on so many fronts, economic crisis, energy crisis, foreign policy crisis, where our allies are on fire and our enemies are running roughshod over other nations. When he talks about a reset, is it going to be more empty rhetoric, or is Joe Biden finally going to work with Republicans to solve these problems? We stand ready. Just like we will be taking up and passing the Laken Riley Act tomorrow, this House has acted every time there's been a crisis and worked on solutions to fix those problems. And the leader at the forefront of that effort is our Speaker, Mike Johnson.
Thank you, Steve. I want to thank you all for being here. It's an important week in Congress, as has been noted, and I want to thank this cross-section of House Republican colleagues of ours who are here to help us highlight a lot of these important things. And I want to just summarize some of what's been said here, and then we'll take questions. But tomorrow, the American people, as you know, we're going to hear from President Biden about the State of the Union. And I've been asked many times, as many of us have, if you had to describe in one word what you believe the State of the Union is, you've heard the word crisis, you've heard catastrophe. I think maybe a summary is decline. And I say that with great sadness, we all do. But it's because of this president and his administration that we are indisputably in decline. Our economic strength is in decline. Everyday goods are more expensive. People can barely afford the cost of living now, their groceries and gasoline. Home ownership is increasingly out of reach. And U.S. household debt is at an all-time high. So our economic strength is in decline. American sovereignty is in decline. You've heard us lament the border. The southern border is a total catastrophe. There's no other way to describe that. Traffickers and cartels have taken operational control of the border. Fentanyl poisoning is killing our children. While President Biden opened the border with his reckless executive actions, and remember, we documented at least 64 actions that he and his agencies have taken to open that border wide. It was by design. In the midst of all that, we also learned last week he never one time spoke to the chief of the Border Patrol. It's unconscionable. Innocent Americans, from Laken Riley in Georgia to the 14-year-old rape victim of an illegal immigrant in our home state of Louisiana, as you just heard Leader Scalise talk about, they've all been victimized by those whom the Biden administration has released into our country. He is releasing them into your state. Every state's a border state. The safety of our cities is in decline. Carjackings are up, attacks against law enforcement are rising. We have more than 600,000 known criminal aliens roaming the streets of America right now, free to reoffend and victimize Americans. The actual number is, of course, much higher. That's the official number that we know about. But we don't know how many people have come across the border. And some of us believe it may be as many as 15 million illegal aliens who have come across that border since Joe Biden walked into the Oval Office 3 years ago. America's presence on the world stage is in decline, and you heard us talk about that this morning as well. Iran, Russia, China, our adversaries are acting more provocatively than they have in many, many years, and we have unrest unlike we haven't seen since World War II. The president is turning his back right now on our greatest ally, Israel. And after Biden's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, our stature has been diminished to a point that is difficult to calculate. During his address, President Biden is going to try to suggest that the State of the Union is strong, and we expect, as was said, that he's going to say this is a time for a reset. But of course, the State of the Union is not strong. And everybody around the country knows it, and everybody in this room knows it. It doesn't matter what political party you're in, where you lean on the political spectrum. You look at objective facts and you know this country is not in good shape because of its leadership in the White House. And that's why at this point in his term, President Biden is the least popular president in modern history. America is in decline, and nothing he says tomorrow night is going to change that. House Republicans, on the other hand, will continue to fight to hold Biden and his administration accountable. That is our constitutional duty, our responsibility, and we will fulfill it. And we are committed to saving this republic. And that will happen in November when the American people let their voices be heard. I'll take a few questions. Yes, ma'am. Look, I would say that the state of the Republican conference is encouraged and strong. We just left a meeting we have a weekly gathering of all the Republicans. And listen, we know that, for example, on the appropriations bill, the government spending, we are not going to get everything that we want. We want to cut spending. We want to limit the size and scope of the federal government. The reality right now is we have divided government. We have a 2-vote majority, one of the smallest in history, in the House. The House Republicans have the majority, but it's a slim majority. And we only control 1/2 of 1/3 of the federal government. So we have to be realistic about what we're able to achieve. But in spite of that, we have an appropriations package that is going to cut non-defense, non-VA discretionary spending. And it is going to increase defense spending at this very important and delicate time around the globe. Those are priorities that we have advanced. And we also advanced, as you've seen the summary, cuts to some of the agencies that we believe are really overreaching and have been turned in some ways against the American people. We're going to cut 3% from DOJ, 7% from the ATF, 6% from the FBI, and 10% from the EPA, and that's just a start. We have a lot more priorities and things that we need to advance, but the reality is, as we all recognize, is that we have to grow the House majority, take back the Senate for the Republican Party, and win the White House. And I'm here to tell you the reason we're optimistic is we believe those things are going to happen in November. We can't wait. That day can't get here soon enough. Yes, sir, right here. Go ahead. Well, the answer is, he asked, we committed to do 12 separate appropriations bills. And the answer to this, and the reason that it's been so difficult to do it, is because Washington has no muscle memory on how to do that. Some of you in the room know that the statutory law requires Congress to work in a very methodical manner to get government spending done. The 1974 Budget Control Act spells out a timetable that begins early in the year and ends by late summer. And that way, you're done with the spending bills well in advance of September 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. Congress hasn't done that in a long, long time. In fact, since I've been in Congress for the last 7 years, and many years before that, we ruled by omnibus. What would happen is the Congress would kick the can down the road to the very last minute at the end of the calendar year, and on the eve of Christmas, the Senate would send to the House a massive omnibus spending bill that spends, close to $2 trillion and has 4,000 pages that no one has time to read. and force a vote up or down on everything all at once. And we said that's not the way to run government. So it takes a long time to turn an aircraft carrier, and we're doing that gradually. We're forcing reforms, trying to force Congress back into the mode, the statutory mode, the lawful mode, in the way in which it's supposed to work with regard to government funding. That means 12 separate appropriations bills, not all lumped into one.
As a member of the Freedom Caucus, I want to remind everybody here that that all occurred before the speakers.
Well, thank you, Scott Perry. Thank you very much. Listen, we're all, in a way, we're sort of victimized by the tradition that's been developed in Congress, and we're working really hard to bend that backwards, right? And so you can't turn an aircraft carrier overnight. So what we did was we broke the omnibus fever. We put it into the laddered CR approach, which was a new invention that Scott Perry and others helped invent, okay, to make this work. And we had to move that deadline a little bit because it takes a long time to get this done. But this is a long, methodical process. It is overdue, but we are very happy now that we're finally to the point where we can move beyond, get FY24 done, and then turn our attention to FY25, where we can begin to continue to push this back into the mode and the manner and the regular order and procedure that this is supposed to work. I think that's good by American taxpayers. I think it's good stewardship, and we're looking forward to moving that forward. Front row. Yes. Well, look, we're very happy with the results last night. The race is set now. It will be a rematch, and we like that rematch. And from my perspective, I think President Trump, what his message is resonating with the American people, because this is not an untested theory. We know what President Trump delivered. The first 2 years of his administration, by just 2 years, we had delivered the greatest economy in the history of the world, not just the U.S. And the reason was because we acted upon our core principles that we've always supported as conservatives, as Republicans. We limited the size and scope of government. We cut regulations substantially. Of course, we had historic tax reform and tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And in addition to that, he was trying to work through the agencies to change the way Washington works. Now, he got a lot of headwinds. He got a lot of resistance in that first term because he was still feeling it out. He had just arrived in Washington and was trying to figure out why some of those agencies would not follow the agenda. In fact, some of them were working against him. I think he has big plans to change some of that going forward. We're going to be a big part of that. The House Republicans are going to work hand in hand with the new president, the 47th president, which we are convinced will be President Donald Trump, and we are going to turn the catastrophe, the crisis, the decline that we've described this morning completely around, because I believe we'll have Republicans lead in the Senate and the House as well, and you will see our agenda run. We look forward to that day. I think it's going to be a good thing for the safety, security, sovereignty, liberty, opportunity of our nation, and it can't happen soon enough. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.